The ballroom of Zirnak's palace shimmered, not with gemstones, but with 1,000 refracted hopes. Ambassador Sarah Collins, her usually impeccable uniform a touch disheveled, surveyed the mingling dignitaries with a practiced eye. Scaled diplomats hissed sibilant greetings, antennae twitched in delicate negotiations over sweet nectars, and somewhere a booming laugh betrayed a deal likely struck over far too many glasses of fermented vapor. It was a microcosm of the wider galactic stage, and humans, for all their strides since first contact, were still very much the new players at the table. A pang of something like melancholy flickered across Sarah's face, then vanished behind a diplomatic smile. She touched the raised line snaking across her left cheek, hidden by artful makeup, a reminder of a shuttle crash, a botched treaty signing, a decade of hard-won respect. Some days the weight of all the scars, seen and unseen, felt heavier than usual. "Ambassador," a voice chirped beside her, snapping her from her musings. Ravi, her new aide, was practically buzzing with nervous energy. "The Viceroy delegation requests your input on." He rattled off a minor trade dispute, but his focus was on the cluster of chitin-plated insectoids nearby, their multifaceted eyes fixed on Sarah. Disdain wasn't even thinly veiled. For all its outward polish, the summit was still a place where humans were tolerated, rather than truly welcomed. Her scars itched under the heavy foundation, old healed, but a constant reminder. It would be the same story with the medical teams she knew. Another routine scan, and another subtle dismissal based on their preconceptions of fragile human biology. Before she could school her expression further, the world exploded. Not in literal flames, though Sarah felt the heat of the blast wave wash over her. No, it was the shattering of expectations, the ballroom lights flickering, panic shrieks overlaid by the hissing of ruptured atmosphere vents. The grand dome overhead spiderwebbed with cracks. The seasoned diplomat in her vanished. For one brief, terrible moment, it was just Sarah, back in the mangled shuttle, the world tilting, alarm screaming, and that awful certainty that this was it. Then hands were on her, Ravi's voice cutting through the panic. "Ambassador, are you?" Sarah blinked, forcing down the surge of adrenaline. "Status," she rasped, professional control reasserting itself over raw memories. "Structural collapse, northwest quadrant." Ravi was in his element now, the whirlwind of chaos fueling his focus. "Injuries, multiple, delegation heads." He trailed off, staring at something over her shoulder. She turned, and her own composure cracked. A trio of figures materialized from the swirling dust, their forms sleek and insectile, segmented limbs moving with unnerving precision. Their medical designation bands gleamed amidst the chaos. Dr. Zalata, head of the triage team, was a name Sarah knew well, and judging by the dismissive click of mandibles as she scanned Sarah, the feeling was mutual. Structural trauma, multiple high-status casualties. Zalara's voice was all business, overriding the rising din of the injured. "Begin prioritization protocol." Her multifaceted eyes flicked over Sarah again, and the briefest twitch of an antenna was all the judgment she needed. "Resume scan at low-priority stations." Sarah felt a white-hot wave of anger, quickly suffocated under the weight of experience. "Dr. Zalara," she managed, the formality a thin shield, "surely you recognize." "Ambassador Collins," Zalara interrupted smoothly, the barest hint of condescension in the way she elongated the title. "Protocol is in place for efficiency. Your injuries will be addressed in due course." Sarah watched as her medical team hovered over a cluster of reptilian dignitaries, their delicate manipulators a blur as they assessed wounds and administered aid. Humans would have to weight their ungainly biology, the patchwork of old scars that hinted at a lifetime of vulnerability, marking them as low-value patients in the ruthless calculus of triage medicine. Beside her, Ravi was sputtering in outrage. "But Ambassador Collins she's critical." He was young, barely a year out of the academy, and the ugly realities of galactic politics were still a harsh lesson to be learned. Dr. Zalara barely deigned to glance at him. "Protocol does not differentiate based on titles," she stated, her voice cool. "Optimal care allocation demands this. Now, if you will excuse us, there are those with a higher chance of successful intervention." She moved off, leaving Sarah with a lingering impression of gleaming chitin plates and a dismissive flick of segmented limbs. Sarah's fingers twitched, the urge to ball them into fists and strike out at Zylara, at the unfairness of it all a near overwhelming force. Another scar to bear then. Another subtle humiliation in a long, exhausting line. There was always a way they found to remind humanity that for all their progress, in some eyes, they'd always be the fragile newcomers. The waiting area was a sterile bubble of muted panic tucked off the main ballroom. Moans echoed softly, cut off by the healer's murmured commands, the rustling of med packs, and the chillingly efficient hum of alien tech. Humans made up a significant portion of the injured diplomat's aides, a few unlucky security staff caught near the blast zone. Ravi paced beside Sarah's makeshift cot, words tumbling out in a rush. "This is unacceptable. You're a vital negotiator. It could jeopardize the whole treaty." She squeezed his arm, a silent plea to stop. Each word was a lance of pain in her side where hasty bandaging covered hastily diagnosed internal injuries. "Ravi," she managed, her voice a ragged whisper, "it's the way things are. Out here, well, let's just say humans don't top the medical priority lists." His youthful outrage sputtered out, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. She saw it reflected in his eyes, that sudden, chilling awareness of the unspoken rules behind the polished facade of galactic cooperation. Through the haze, she noticed the lingering glances from the few aliens sharing the waiting area. There was pity there, yes, but also a predatory calculation sizing up how long she might last, an unspoken countdown on her survival. She was not merely a patient, but a problematic resource, wasting valuable space. Suddenly, the memory of the shuttle crash seemed less distant. The same helplessness, the slow fade, while the world moved on around her. "Ambassador," Ravi's voice, muted with worry, barely penetrated the rising tide of darkness. She blinked hard, fighting the encroaching fog. She wouldn't go out like this on some alien world, reduced to a biological equation they couldn't bother to solve. Even if it took her last ounce of strength, she'd change their assumptions. "Ravi," she forced the words out, "remember that story I told you about the mining accident?" He blinked, bewildered by the sudden shift in topic. But ever loyal, he settled by her side. "The collapsed tunnel? Where you? Tell me, what do you see when you look at me?" At first, he hesitated, then confusion turned to dawning understanding. "Scars," he said, "old injuries. A lifetime of not being careful enough, I suppose." A weak laugh rasped from Sarah's throat. That much was true, at least. The reckless edge of her youth had faded, but the galaxy was a dangerous place, and diplomacy had its own battlefields. "Now," she said, voice little more than a wheeze, "tell me what else." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Ravi's face. "I see resilience," he offered tentatively. "The fact that you're even here, after all." "Go on," she pressed, a faint smile playing on her lips, fueled more by stubbornness than strength. He seemed to search the map of lines etched across her visible skin, tracing the paths of old wounds with his eyes. "That crash," he began slowly, "holding your team together long enough for rescue, that takes an insane level of determination. And the scar on my temple, the diplomatic incident on the Kashiri station," her voice grew fainter, but her eyes held his, demanding he see beyond the clinical assessment of damaged flesh. He hesitated, negotiating in bad faith, surrounded by hostiles. There's a certain fearlessness to that. "You don't just survive," he said, a touch of awe replacing his worry. "You fight back." It was the simplest summary, yet in that moment of shared revelation, it felt as weighty as any treaty. Their quiet exchange was cut short by a sudden commotion. An underling on Zylara's team, a scaled reptilian Sarah vaguely recalled, approached the cot. It twitched nervously, its translator emitting a high-pitched whine. Ambassador Collins, it squeaked. Dr. Zylara wishes to re-examine your condition. Sarah and Ravi exchanged a long, silent look. Had Zylara miraculously had a change of heart? Doubtful. More likely, political pressure to at least pretend to care about a human dignitary was trickling down. Very well, Sarah rasped, masking her skepticism with a touch of dry formality. This wasn't a victory yet, merely an opportunity, and she would seize it with both scarred hands if she could. The examination was conducted with cold efficiency, a stark contrast to the underling's nervous energy. It focused less on her visible wounds, as Sarah suspected, and more on a series of scans, the alien tech whirring and clicking in unfamiliar patterns. Zylara loomed nearby, her face an unreadable mask. It was the underling of all people who broke the silence. Dr. Zylara, it piped up, hesitation mixing with a hint of quiet defiance. The scans, they indicate inconsistencies, internal damage greater than the initial triage suggested. It stole a glance at Sarah, something like fascination flickered in its multifaceted eyes. To the reptilian, she was no longer just a dismissed patient, but a biological puzzle. A flicker of irritation tightened Zylara's mandibles, barely noticeable to humans, but blatant to another of her species. Inconsistencies are to be expected in a structure this suboptimal, she said dismissively. Proceed only if further intervention holds a favorable probability of success. It was the familiar refrain dressed up in technical jargon. Don't waste resources on a lost cause. Ravi bristled, ready to protest, but Sarah raised a hand, silencing him. This was a dance she knew too well. Dr. Zylara, she managed, the words feeling strangely heavy now. With all due respect, your optimal standards are built upon a specific understanding of biology. She gestured to herself, wincing slightly at the movement. This suboptimal structure has carried me quite far. Your scans are off because we are built differently. Zylara's segmented limbs shifted uneasily, a clear sign of agitation. Ambassador, we cannot tailor protocols to every minor variation in— Not minor, Sarah cut in, finding a sliver of her old negotiator's fire, potentially life-saving. Desperation sharpened her voice. I'm not asking for special treatment, just a chance. For the treaty, for 1,000 unseen humans in the waiting rooms of the galaxy, she refused to back down. Ravi watched transfixed. The ambassador, laid bare, scars and vulnerabilities exposed, was somehow more formidable than he'd ever seen her with her impeccably composed facade. Zylara stared at her, the silence stretching into an excruciating length. Every instinct must have urged her to shut Sarah down, restore order to the efficient hierarchy of her medical world. Yet a grudging flicker of curiosity won out. One experimental procedure, she clipped, to confirm your hypothesis. Success is unlikely. Should this fail, you will return to the standard waiting queue. It was a gamble, a throw of the dice weighted against her. But then again, Sarah Collins had spent a lifetime playing against worse odds. Agreed, she rasped, ignoring the spike of pain that shot through her side. The procedure was an ordeal. Alien tools designed for the smooth lines and predictable structures of their ideal patients were fumbled and recalibrated against her stubborn human form. Unexpected scar tissue, the unforeseen patterns of old injuries, threw off every predicted outcome. Through gritted teeth, Sarah refused the painkillers. Every jolt, every hiss of misaligned tech was proof. Proof that her body, a tapestry of close calls and imperfect healing, held secrets even the galaxy's greatest healers couldn't anticipate. When it was over, she slumped back, exhaustion washing over her in a far more brutal wave than the pain. Ravi hovered, his youthful optimism replaced with a grim determination. And Zylara stood as still as a statue, her multifaceted eyes unreadable. The silence was broken, not by Zylara, but by her reptilian underling. It worked, it squeaked, a note of disbelief echoing in its translator unit. But, I don't— how? Zylara finally clicked her mandibles in agitation, yet the sharp sound couldn't hide the profound crack in her composure. Explain, she ordered. The word wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand born out of a lifetime of certainty suddenly turned on its head. Sarah watched the underling, the hesitant reptilian named T-Vase, if she recalled correctly, step forward as if called to a firing line. It fidgeted nervously, mandibles twitching as its translator struggled to form the words. The intervention was targeted for a specific regenerative cascade. It began, the high-pitched whine of its voice emphasizing its unease, common to most high-tier species. It shot a nervous glance at Zylara, seeming to shrink under her glare. In human physiology, the reaction, it was altered by the presence of old cellular trauma, scar tissue. The word echoed in the sterile room, a quiet indictment of everything Zylara's rigid protocols stood for. Elaborate, Zylara demanded, her voice a clipped hiss. We targeted a specific healing factor, T-Vase continued, gaining a sliver of confidence. Now it delved into the technical. In your subject, in Ambassador Collins, the scarring seems to have created localized hyperactivity. The body overcompensates. It was sheer chance that this aligned favorably with the treatment. Zylara's segmented limbs shifted uneasily. This defied everything she built her career upon, the predictability of the biological ideal, the clean, efficient solutions. Humans, with their chaotic healing and patchwork anatomies, threw a wrench into the system. It was to Sarah that she turned, a flicker of disconcerting fascination in her multifaceted eyes. You bear the marks of numerous injuries. This is common for your kind? Sarah held her gaze, the fire of defiance from before banked down to a low burn. Our existence is less ordered than yours. Accidents abound. Conflict. She swallowed, old grief scratching at her composure. Conflict has marked our past. For the briefest flicker, Sarah saw something like understanding in the alien medic's eyes, a fleeting recognition of a shared universe where pain wasn't an anomaly, but a common thread. Ravi, ever observant, broke the charged silence. We don't heal perfectly, he said, a tremor in his young voice, but we heal. Zylara didn't respond, lost in the sudden, overwhelming expansion of her rigid worldview. The underling T-Vase stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time, not as a patient, but as a testament to a strange and tenacious resilience. In the aftermath, the whispers of a medical anomaly, the begrudging shift in protocols spurred by political necessity, Sarah felt little triumph. It was one battle won, the war far from over. Yet, lying in a recovery pod that had been calibrated with hesitant hands to her chaotic human form, she allowed herself a flicker of satisfaction. The scars remained, some still achingly fresh. But now they were more than a mark of past damage. They were proof, a story etched onto her very being, a story that had begun to change how the galaxy looked at humanity. Later, she caught T-Vase hovering outside. The young reptilian met her eyes, and in its translator's chirp, she heard not dismissal, but the first tentative notes of a question. Ambassador, may I examine the scars on your hand? The request hung in the air, a strange intimacy within the sterile confines of the recovery wing. A year ago, Sarah might have dismissed it, another curious alien prodding at human frailties. Now, she saw something different in T-Vase's eyes, a spark of genuine fascination untainted by preconceptions. Very well, she rasped, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. T-Vase moved closer, its segmented form looming over her with an odd mix of practiced clinical focus and childlike wonder. One manipulator, equipped with sensor pads rather than sharp instruments, delicately traced the lines of an old burn on her hand, the aftermath of a diplomatic mission on a world with an unstable atmosphere. The coloration, the skin texture, this was caused by exposure to a volatile compound. Its voice was barely above a whisper, the translator unit struggling to catch the nuance in its clicks and mandibles. Plasma leak from a faulty containment field, she confirmed, watching as T-Vase absorbed the information, comparing it to some internal catalog of injuries it had likely never encountered until now. And this? It moved on to a jagged scar circling her wrist, a souvenir from a hostage situation that had turned violent. Lacerations, then, self-repair has been inconsistent. There was no judgment in its tone, only a relentless, almost obsessive curiosity. It was the curiosity of a scientist faced with a puzzle that challenged every principle they'd been taught. Sarah found it an oddly refreshing change from the usual pity or veiled disgust. "Our regeneration, it's messy," she explained, the words flowing more easily now. "Sometimes the body overcorrects, tries too hard to mend the damage." She recounted the stories behind each scar that Tvez pointed to. The mining accident in her youth, the diplomatic standoff where she talked down an armed zealot, even the faded, thin line on her cheek, her first scar, a reminder of a childhood fall and the sheer luck of avoiding lasting damage. It was an inversion of the usual protocol, patient becoming teacher, weakness becoming a strange point of power. Tvez listened intently, its translator whirring as it pieced together the narratives, the biological implications. "You endure much," it finally concluded, the statement devoid of pity. "We adapt," Sarah corrected, a flicker of pride warming her despite the lingering exhaustion. It was more than just enduring, it was a form of defiance sculpted into their very bodies. Tvez met her gaze, a dawning comprehension in its multifaceted eyes. For a long, silent moment, it seemed as if some unspoken exchange passed between them, medic and patient, alien and human, two beings separated by a vast gulf of biology, yet connected by the shared language of trauma and resilience. Finally, it offered a slight, respectful bow. "Ambassador," the translator chirped, "perhaps you would consent to further, non-invasive scans for research purposes." Sarah laughed then, a rough, genuine sound that surprised even herself. "Of course, doctor," she hesitated, remembering its name, Tvez. "Let's see what other surprises this suboptimal form of mine has in store." News of the incident at the summit spread like a shockwave through the galactic community. It wasn't just the bomb, or even the swift mending of Sarah's underestimated injuries, but the symbolism of it all. The story of the human ambassador, scarred yet unyielding, whose body itself defied the norms of galactic medicine, became a whisper on every embassy floor and a headline across countless news feeds. The fallout was complex, messy, and exactly the kind of disruption Sarah relished. Overnight, those neat categories of optimal and suboptimal species, built on centuries of carefully reinforced medical dogma, began to teeter. High-ranking aliens suddenly requested scans with an unprecedented focus on old injuries, a quiet acknowledgement that their model of biological perfection might have its flaws. Zilata, with unsettling adaptability, funneled her shaken certainty into a fierce drive for research. She became the begrudging champion of a collaborative study on atypical trauma response, much to her colleagues' chagrin. Sarah provided her body as a living case study, enduring countless non-invasive scans, her scars analyzed with a precision formerly reserved for pristine specimens. Ravi, promoted for his unwavering support and sudden media savvy, became her unofficial liaison with the press. It was dizzying, going from backroom negotiations to interviews broadcast on a dozen worlds. Yet he saw the strategy in Sarah's measured cooperation. They weren't just exploiting a flash in the pan, they were laying the groundwork for a lasting shift in perception. Humans, it turned out, were a mess of contradictions. Fragile, yet enduring. Their bodies prone to break down as readily as they demonstrated shocking resilience. Old wounds, instead of being signs of weakness, were potential fonts of untapped biological potential. The ripple effects were fascinating, even frightening, to those accustomed to the rigid order of standardized galactic medicine. Tvez, ever in the thick of this scientific whirlwind, was transformed. Gone was the hesitant underling. It bloomed under Zilara's tutelage and Sarah's unique mentorship. There was a spark in those multifaceted eyes now, a thirst for knowledge that pushed at the boundaries of every accepted protocol. A year later found Sarah back on Zirnak, the ballroom restored to its usual glittering splendor for a new summit. Her scars, often hidden by cosmetics, were boldly visible today. They drew stares, whispers, the occasional hiss of disapproval from some corners, but also a dawning respect from many others. Zilara found her before the opening address, a rigid formality masking an unfamiliar uncertainty. "Ambassador, a private consultation, if your schedule permits." It was posed as a question, but they both knew it was a summons. In a small, sterile room, stripped of all but the essentials, a year's worth of research culminated. Zylara clicked her mandibles, a nervous habit Sarah had come to recognize. Your cellular anomalies, they extend beyond simple trauma response, she stated bluntly. I have isolated genetic markers that may point to a heightened adaptive capacity. It's a controversial hypothesis. Let me guess, Sarah smirked. Your colleagues called it wildly improbable, or even bad science? They are, reluctant to accept a thesis based on a single atypical subject. Sarah leaned in, resting her scarred hands on the sterile table between them. Tell me, doctor, when you look at me now, what do you see? It was the echo of a question in a long-ago waiting room. Zylara paused, her multifaceted eyes unreadable, then met Sarah's gaze head-on. Possibility, she finally rasped, where before there was only supposed limitation. Sarah smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but one of hard-won understanding tinged with a sliver of weariness. Then let's show them, doctor, together. The collaboration that followed was as contentious as it was groundbreaking. Zylara, a titan shaken from her ivory tower, faced down her skeptical peers with the ferocity of a cornered predator. Sarah, the scarred diplomat, leveraged every ounce of political capital built on that fateful summit, smoothing ruffled feathers and forging uneasy alliances between species known to eye each other with deep-rooted suspicion. Tv's, the rising star, was their wild card. Its research was meticulous, its theories bordering on radical, often dismissed, and then reluctantly re-examined as results trickled in subtle shifts in alien patients with extensive injury histories, anomalies that mirrored aspects of human physiology. The changes they sought were not swift or without casualties. Old biases lingered, whispering of dangers in meddling with natural order. Yet, with each breakthrough, with each case where treatment tailored to old scar tissue turned the tide for a higher-tier patient, the whispers grew fainter. 5 years on, Sarah attended a conference housed in a gleaming medical facility on the neutral world of Ilara Prime. It was the inaugural symposium on interspecies trauma response. The attendees were a kaleidoscope of forms: insectoids, reptilians, elegant beings with crystalline limbs, even a delegation of notoriously reclusive methane breathers. Humans were there, but not as the central focus. They were students, presenters, and colleagues, their presence accepted as the new norm. Sarah found herself drawn to a group of young medics, a mix of species, huddled over a display showcasing a complex, multi-species tissue regeneration simulation. The familiar patterns of human scar formation were interwoven with alien cellular models, not as a weakness, but a potential variable to explore. They looked up as she approached, a flicker of recognition and what might have been awe in their eyes. She smiled, touching the healed burn on her hand. Scars tell stories, wouldn't you agree? The symposium was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and change was a slow, grinding process. Yet, on backwater clinics and grand medical ships, the idea was taking root. That damage and the body's response to it were not markers of inferiority, but a vast, untapped script of survival. One evening, amidst the endless flow of receptions and networking, Tvs approached her. It had matured, carapaces gleaming, the hesitant underling now a recognized authority in its rapidly expanding field. Ambassador, it chirped, with only a trace of its old timidity, a breakthrough. We've managed to synthesize a compound based on your unique cellular markers. Early trials suggest accelerated healing across a dozen species. Sarah felt a flicker of pride, not for herself, but for the relentless forward march of knowledge. Potential for good, she murmured, born from a moment of dismissed weakness. They stood side by side, alien and human, and watched the delegates swirl past. A scarred diplomat and the once lowly medic, both catalysts of a shift that had started with an act of defiance in a dusty waiting room. Sarah's gaze swept the crowd, resting on the myriad forms, each carrying their own unseen stories of pain and resilience. There was still much to be done, battles to be fought for true acceptance. But as Tvs nudged her, sharing a new research proposal with infectious enthusiasm, Sarah felt a familiar, stubborn optimism burn within her. It was an enduring echo of a young aide's simple statement amidst chaos. We don't heal perfectly, but we heal. Decades spun past in a whirlwind that Sarah came to both relish and dread with equal measure. The galaxy was a stubborn thing, slow to evolve, yet the changes she helped ignite continued their relentless course. Treatment protocols shifted, medical academies grudgingly revised their textbooks, and clinics in fringe systems, once dismissive of all but the most standardized patients, began to see the potential in those dismissed as damaged goods. Of course, there were the setbacks. The resurgence of old guard medical voices decrying a decline in purity standards. Pushback came from surprising corners, those fearing the unlocking of biological potential on a mass scale might threaten the carefully maintained hierarchy among species. Yet the tide had turned. A new generation of medics was rising, with TVs at the forefront, for whom scars were as rich a diagnostic tool as any high-tech scanner. Sarah herself was less a diplomat now and more a walking case study, her aged, much-examined form a symbol both praised and scrutinized. She found a strange solace in teaching. Not the power plays and accords she once excelled in, but lecturing at the fledgling Interspecies Medical Institute built on Elara Prime. Her students hung on her every word, a motley collection of eager young beings for whom the Ambassador Collins incident was a foundational myth. And sometimes, amidst the complex jargon of cross-species medicine, Sarah would pause, holding aloft her weathered hand. "See this?" she'd rasp, the fire of the old negotiator still sparking in her faded eyes. "A childhood accident. Nearly cost me my fingers." Then the lesson would shift, not towards the biological, but the immeasurable, of grit, of bloody-minded persistence in a universe that seemed engineered to break you down. She'd share stories not just of her own scars, but of others, the young miner with acid-burned lungs who went on to discover a revolutionary respiratory treatment, the scarred refugee whose trauma spurred the breakthrough development of cross-species telepathic therapy. Of course, some scoffed, calling it sentimental nonsense amidst the cold calculations of medicine. But in the faces of her students, across a kaleidoscope of alien expressions, Sarah saw understanding dawn. That resilience wasn't some abstract concept, but a force honed in hardship, written as clearly upon the body as any genetic code. Ravi stayed at her side, surprisingly. He shed his youthful idealism for a tempered determination that suited him well. Battles in the Galactic Senate were now his forte, his voice a steady drumbeat against the ever-present voices of caution and prejudice. Zylara, amazingly, had become an unlikely ally. The chasm between them never truly closed, their interactions still tinged with a prickly formality. Yet there was a grudging admiration, a shared understanding of the long, hard fight for progress. One evening, amidst the ceaseless bustle of a summit hosted, ironically, on the human world of New Sydney, Sarah found herself alone in her temporary quarters. Age was an unseen scar, more keenly felt now. She poured a fortifying drink, not the sweet concoctions aliens favored, but something with a fiery burn reminiscent of her homeland. A knock echoed at the door. It was Zylara, her segmented form rigid, a data pad clutched in her manipulators. "Ambassador," she began, with a customary formality, then faltered. "Sarah, I require your consultation." The use of her given name was a startling shift. Sarah gestured her inside, curiosity overriding her exhaustion. "It is a personal matter," Zylara rasped, the click of her mandibles sharp in the silence. With an uncharacteristic hesitation, she offered the datapad. Sarah scanned the display medical readouts, tissue analysis, and a flurry of frantic notes. "Zylara," she breathed, her voice hoarse, this indicates—" "A degenerative condition," Zylara finished, the certainty in her voice cracking. "Unique to my kind. It is likely terminal." Sarah stared at the implacable alien who once dismissed humans as walking liabilities. An echo of their first encounter, the tables cruelly turned. Yet now it was Zylara who was vulnerable, marred with the invisible scars of a failing body. "Let me see," Sarah said, an old stubbornness rising within her. "Let me see what stories your scars tell." Zylara, the paragon of meticulous efficiency, found herself unmoored. Her carapace, normally gleaming with assured polish, seemed dull, weathered under the harsh light of Sarah's quarters. The human silence as she studied the datapad, her brow furrowed in concentration, was like the slow tightening of a vice. The deterioration is atypical, Sarah mumbled finally, more to herself than to her visitor. Aggressively localized, yet with a baffling resistance to standard treatment protocols. She looked up then, her faded eyes unexpectedly sharp. It's like your body, overcompensating for a perceived flaw, is working against itself. Much like, Sarah trailed off, her gaze falling to her own gnarled hands. Zilara hissed, the sound laced with self-directed bitterness. It is a cruel irony. Our strengths, the rigidly organized biological processes that ensured our species' rise, they've become the instrument of my demise. Perhaps, Sarah murmured, a spark of a long-dormant thrill igniting in her. They are simply misunderstood strengths. Have your people ever studied cross-species regenerative anomalies? Hope was a dangerous creature, Zilara knew this well. Yet it flickered in her multifaceted eyes as Sarah began outlining a course of action so outlandish it bordered on the desperate. Examining decades-old records from the Ambassador Collins incident, scouring forgotten research on interspecies tissue compatibility, even consulting an eccentric and some whispered, slightly unhinged bioengineer who specialized in what he gleefully called messy biology. There were no promises of miracles. Only grueling days spent hunched over analysis, nights punctuated by the stinging disappointment of dead ends. Ravi, with unwavering belief, used his diplomatic sway to open doors that would normally be slammed shut on such unorthodox pursuits. Tivez, now a luminary in its own right, brought youthful brilliance tempered by the scars of its own hard-fought battles for acceptance. It was Tivez's relentless mind that stumbled upon a connection hidden in a dusty treatise on a long-abandoned terraforming project, a strange adaptation observed in insectoid settlers, exposed to a mix of earth flora and a unique fungal strain. The implications were staggering, the potential both exhilarating and terrifying. And it was Sarah, her hand surprisingly steady despite its tremors, who administered the first experimental dose of a synthesized compound. A twisted echo of their first fateful encounter, but this time with Zilara as the doubtful patient. The results weren't immediate. No sudden, miraculous healing. Yet the relentless deterioration slowed, then subtly shifted. Scar-like tissue bloomed amidst the diseased areas, not the smooth perfection Zilara's body typically produced, but a jagged, untidy formation. Your body, it's fighting back, Sarah breathed, her own scars aching in sympathy. But it needed a roadmap. It was not a cure. Zilara, ever the pragmatist, knew that with grim certainty. But it was a reprieve time carved out against the odds. And more importantly, it was proof. Proof that those rigid boundaries that so long defined the galaxy's approach to healing could be shattered. In the years that followed, clinics hesitant to serve flawed patients bloomed into hubs of collaborative medicine. Zilara, her life extended, her body a tapestry of imperfect healing, became a reluctant champion for those discarded by the old protocols. Sarah, her own steps growing slower, found grim satisfaction in igniting a revolution in her twilight years. The day came when a wide-eyed child of a species with delicate, easily scarred skin was rushed into an emergency room, not turned away, but greeted with questions on how it was hurt, rather than dismissed as irreparable. On her deathbed, surrounded not by the sterile walls of a hospital, but by the warm light of her home-world sun, Sarah was content. Her hand, gnarled and scarred, found Ravi's much younger one, still smooth and unblemished. "Don't let them become complacent," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Progress, true resilience, it's born in the fight. Never let them forget that." Ravi, now a seasoned statesman with silver at his temples, nodded. He understood. It was the lesson written upon her body, the legacy that extended far beyond the fading life of one stubbornly resilient human. And there, under the warmth of a familiar star, surrounded by a tapestry of beings insectoid reptilian, even a methane breather in its cumbersome environmental suit, Sarah Collins, the scarred diplomat, breathed her last. The galaxy, forever changed, mourned a revolutionary. But more importantly, it continued the fight. A century turned. Stars burned out. New civilizations flickered into existence amidst the vast expanse of the cosmos. The names Sarah Collins and the legendary Dr. Zirnak faded into a revered echo, less individuals and more the embodiment of a turning point. Yet their legacy was not confined to dusty textbooks or commemorative statues. It pulsed in the thrum of interspecies medical stations orbiting forgotten worlds, where a child with burn scars mimicking ancient star charts was seen not as a case study in unusual tissue regeneration, but simply as a patient in need. In the echoing halls of the Interspecies Medical Institute, generations of students' beings with compound eyes, iridescent scales, or bioluminescent tendrils touched intricate holomodels, simulating the chaotic healing pathways first discovered in a frail human body. They were taught a doctrine honed through bitter experience. Scars are not weaknesses, but records of resilience. Look closer, for within their patterns lie untapped potential. The galaxy was not perfect, never would be. Conflicts still flared, and the specter of prejudice, driven underground, lurked in shadowy corners. But amidst the setbacks, the hard-fought gains held a stubborn tenacity. On the newly terraformed world of Elora Secundus, a mixed-species archaeological team unearthed the ruins of an ancient summit hall. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the once grand dome. A young anthropologist with vibrant, feathered crests traced the remnants of an inscription carved into a crumbling wall. With painstaking care, they cleaned away the grime of ages, revealing words in the archaic script of the early Common Era, more than skin deep. The meaning was partially lost in the mists of time, the context a mystery. Yet the feathered archaeologist felt an odd resonance, a ripple echoing across a distance of years they couldn't begin to fathom. It was a reminder that some stories, however improbable their beginnings, etch themselves into the fabric of the cosmos, reshaping reality with every retelling. Across the bustling space lanes, a scarred veteran, scales dulled with age, commanded a Starcorps medical frigate. Their crew was a motley assemblage united not by species, but by a shared philosophy. "Remember," the captain rasped, his voice amplified across the calm system, "each injury overcome, each scar proudly borne, makes you stronger, makes us all stronger." It was a sentiment echoed in 1,000 clinics, in research labs on the frontiers of known space, and in hushed conversations between beings forced to the fringes by the simple lottery of their biology. The legacy of a scarred diplomat and a reluctant alien medic had become a battle cry for both the individual and the collective struggle for acceptance in a universe that often judged by surfaces. And so, the story continued, not as a tale with a neat conclusion, but as an ongoing, messy, breathtakingly beautiful fight. For the galaxy was like a scar in itself, a testament to cataclysms endured, to the imperfect, ever-evolving process of healing. The story of Sarah and Zirnak was woven into its grand tapestry, a constant reminder that the most profound revolutions often begin with a single, overlooked scar. In the grand scheme of the cosmos, even a century is but a blink. Yet, even in this short time, the ripples of Sarah and Zirnak's legacy had broadened, shifting into unexpected forms. The Interspecies Scar Project was, at first, an audacious art installation. Beings from a myriad of worlds, bearing marks of injuries old and new, were invited to contribute scans, images, or even physical imprints of their scars. At first it drew criticism, some found it morbid, others questioned the scientific value of such an endeavor. But like so many things born from the spirit of Sarah Collins, the project possessed a tenacious spark. Scars normally hidden under clothing or scales were now displayed with breathtaking defiance. Each was accompanied by a fragment, a story of the incident, an explanation of how it shaped who they were, or a simple statement of survival. A miner recounted how an acid burn mapped the contours of a collapsed tunnel, leaving her permanently sightless in one eye, but igniting a passion for developing tactile navigation aids for others with disabilities. There was the Star Pilot, a kaleidoscope of grafted skin, replacing the flesh seared in an atmospheric breach, who spoke not of the accident, but of the impossible rescues they made possible afterward. The sheer volume of submissions overwhelmed the original gallery space. The project, in its stubborn refusal to be contained, became a traveling exhibition, a tapestry of textured images woven into the fabric of space stations and even projected onto the swirling gases of a nebula as a poignant tribute visible for light years. A phrase emerged, uttered in countless languages, in hushed hospital wards and echoing in the halls of power, "Show your scars." It became a call to defy preconceptions, a challenge to see beyond surface-level judgments. Politicians found their past brushes with death, once hidden in shame, suddenly became assets, proof of their grit in the eyes of their varied constituents. Military parades once focused on pristine uniforms began incorporating veterans displaying their battle wounds with disarming honesty. Of course, there was backlash. Cynics declared it a passing fad, exploiters tried to commercialize the movement, and those clinging to the old order of perfection decried it as encouraging weakness. But the deeper meaning, that resilience was forged in hardship and potential lay in the unexpected, had taken firm root in the collective consciousness of the galaxy. TV's, ever on the bleeding edge of research, found itself drawn to the project. It saw not just a sociological study, but a treasure trove of biological data. With meticulous care and the utmost respect for the contributors, it dove into the analysis of a dizzying array of scars across countless species. What emerged was a groundbreaking revelation. Regeneration wasn't merely a return to original form, but a process deeply influenced by environment, experience, and even the individual's state of mind at the time of injury. Within the seemingly chaotic patterns of imperfect healing, TV's found clues toward unlocking previously unsuspected adaptive potential across a vast swath of species. This discovery was the final push that shattered the last vestiges of the optimal biology ideal. Medicine became even more tailored, less about enforcing a rigid standard and more about understanding that healing was a unique collaboration between biology and the lived experiences etched upon it. And as understanding grew, so did empathy. In the final decade of that transformative century, an aging TV's stood before a gathering of the brightest minds in the galaxy. Its multifaceted eyes held a quiet, echoing pride as it presented a living testament to Sarah and Zylara's legacy. A being bearing a patchwork of scars, some smooth, some jagged, across subtly mismatched textures of synthetic and organic tissue. This was not a patient, but a pioneer, the first successful multi-species graft recipient, made possible not by ignoring the lessons of imperfect healing, but by embracing them. The hush that fell over the assembly was not of shock, but of profound awe. An era had ended, and an even brighter one was dawning, born from the bold claim that what once marked you as damaged could become the source of profound, beautiful change. Millennia turned relentless as the cycle of stars. The galaxy itself became a scar upon the fabric of existence, a testament to cataclysms endured, to the ceaseless, chaotic process of creation and renewal. Sarah Collins and Dr. Zylara were names spoken of in hushed reverence. Yet it wasn't the individual details of their story that held the true power, but the enduring echo of their actions. The simple truth they had fought so hard to prove, that strength and potential could be found in unexpected places, written in the hidden language of scars. Medicine had evolved into something almost unrecognizable to its early practitioners. Regeneration specialists like oracles of old pored over scar tissue not with disdain but with an explorer's awe. They charted the lines of a healed wound as a treasure map, each twist and turn a clue to adaptive pathways waiting to be unlocked for the good of the patient and the evolution of their species. The concept of optimal biology was relegated to the dustbin of history. Clinics once catering to the elite now proudly served those society once discarded as flawed. The stigma surrounding injury and the signs of healing it left behind had lessened, a slow but steady transformation in how beings from 1,000 worlds perceived their own bodies. Acceptance, however, was not the same as perfection. For every life-altering breakthrough inspired by the legacy of Sarah and Zylara, there was still pain, loss, and the cruel randomness of a universe that often cared little for the delicate dance of biology. The fight for understanding, the unending push against the confines of what was deemed possible, continued as fiercely as ever. New frontiers were the perfect breeding ground for this relentless struggle. A research outpost on the swirling fringes of a newly formed star cluster sent out a desperate plea. An unforeseen side effect of long-term exposure to the nebula's unique radiation was not illness, but a strange form of hyperscarring. Skin, chitins, scales, all were reacting with frightening intensity, healed wounds reopening, the body seemingly trapped in a destructive cycle of endless repair. Panic threatened to consume the outpost. Echoes of old fears resurfaced, whispers of a dangerous deviation, a need to quarantine to limit the potential contagion of imperfection. It was a chilling reminder that prejudice lay dormant, never truly eradicated. Then came the response, a signal cutting through the chaos. It was not a medical task force from some central world, but a collection of individuals loosely bound by a shared philosophy. There was a descendant of Tv's, its multi-limbed form testament to a legacy of interspecies grafting. Beside them stood a renowned biosculptor, herself a canvas of intentional scars that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. They were accompanied by experts in trauma psychology, ethicists, and even a grizzled space trucker whose vast, cybernetic lace body told the story of a long-ago disaster and an even longer road to acceptance. They descended upon the outpost not with promises of an easy cure, but with a quiet determination born from centuries of challenging the norm. They examined the afflicted, shared their own scars, and spoke of the intricate dance between body and mind in the face of trauma. Slowly, the fear began to ebb, replaced by a cautious collaboration. The solution, as with all groundbreaking change, was surprisingly simple. They tapped into the hypersensitivity of the damaged tissues, using them as a canvas for a new form of scar art that channeled the excess regenerative energy, guiding it in intricate patterns that were safe and even beautiful. It was medicine meeting self-expression, a defiant reminder that those the universe attempted to break could still create in the wake of the damage. The outpost on the edge of the nebula became a beacon, a place where being flawed was a starting point for innovation, and the scars told stories not just of pain, but of defiance, creativity, and ever-expanding potential. And so it was that the legacy of a scarred diplomat and an alien medic who dared look deeper lived on. Not as a static monument, but as an eternal act of rebellion. A constant reminder whispered in surgical suites, scrawled on dusty excavation sites, and carried on solar winds to the furthest corners of explored space. There is strength in scars. There is beauty in the imperfect. The greatest transformations are born from the places we once thought broken. In the tapestry of a vast and ever-changing cosmos, there exists an unassuming echo of a world long since swallowed by its aging sun, a place called Earth. In the archives of countless species, some far wiser and vastly more ancient than humanity ever was, fragmented records exist amidst historical oddities and studies on evolutionary dead ends. Humanity was neither the first nor the last intelligent civilization to fight its way into the galactic landscape. Yet their story holds a strange, raw fascination. It's a tale whispered in the shifting light of strange suns, told to young, eager beings whose scars, should they possess any, were mapped and understood down to the cellular level. We call them the species of scars, an AI instructor might intone, hovering amidst a class of translucent jellyfish like students shimmering with soft bioluminescence. Biologically unremarkable, technologically clumsy in their rise, but a series of images flicker across the learning dome. Star charts, crude medical drawings, the jagged line on the weathered face of Ambassador Collins, unyielding in their capacity to endure. The students pulse in quiet contemplation. Such concepts are difficult to grasp for beings who regenerate a lost limb as easily as they change the ambient color of their personal biospheres. It's here that the archive shifts, less about hard science and more about a messy, chaotic symphony of voices. Sarah Collins, not as a historical figure, but a character in 1,000 morality plays, each culture infusing her with their own ideals. There's Sarah the defiant, her scars blazing brighter than the medals of any warrior. Sarah the diplomat, whispering truth in subtly altered tales, turning the signs of hard-fought battles into bridges between disparate species. There's even Sarah the trickster, a figure drawn with a hint of mischief bordering on reverence. And Zilada, never merely a foil or an antagonist. Instead, across a dazzling array of reinterpretations, Zilada is the questioner, driven by relentless curiosity into the unknown. Zilada, the skeptic, brought low by her own certainty, rising stronger from the acceptance of imperfection. The AI gleams, a soft reflected light washing over its smooth, unblemished form. You wonder, why do we study a species who no longer walk among the stars? It's simple. They remind us. The room feels suddenly vast as images of scars fill the dome-woven patterns of healed burns, a synaptic map of a brain rerouted after devastating injury, the faint lines where a lost organ was replaced with a marvel of cross-species grafting. They remind us that perfect healing can mean stagnation, that our triumphs can be born from moments we think we've failed. That scars, the eye's voice seems to echo with 1,000 voices from the human past, are not endings, but the raw, beautiful material from which we forge our own extraordinary tomorrows. Perhaps, somewhere in the grand spiral of the galaxy, there is even an echo of Ravi, the young idealist who became a grizzled defender of progress, and Tevez, whose name is synonymous with both meticulous research and audacious leaps into the unexplored. Perhaps their story, like Sarah and Xylara's, has taken on new, unexpected shapes. For the legacy of scars is not static, it bends and twists with the relentless creativity of the universe itself. It is a song of defiance, a whispered dare, and an invitation. Look closer at what you might have dismissed. Embrace the marks the universe carves upon you, and then create something extraordinary from the pieces.